our speakers. We have some great speakers today. We have Nikki Berteau. Nikki is Senior Product Manager at Broadridge Financial Solutions. We have Nabil Chima, Special Counsel, Office of Rulemaking, Division of Corporation Finance at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Lisa Cousineau, XBRL Consulting Services and Professional Standards at Broadridge Financial Solutions. Angela McTeer, Business Requirements Analyst, Donnelly Financial Solutions, or DFIN. Justine Robinson, Counsel at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. And Scott Tice, CEO of Novorks. One other point I wanted to raise is that if you do have questions as we go throughout the program, please click on the Q&A link that you see on your Zoom console, and you should be able to submit questions, and we'll take them as we go through the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Angela McTeer. Actually, first I'm going to tell you what our agenda is today. Apologies. First, Angela is going to start us off with an overview of the rule. We're then going on with Nikki, who's going to give us practical XBRL tagging and preparation. And then Lisa is going to lead us in a discussion about the rule with Justine and Nabil. And then finally, we're going to go to Scott, who's going to provide us with a lot of tips and resources to help. So with that, I am now going to turn it over to Angela. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle, thank you. Greetings. So for the overview. So effective September 5th, 2023, all registrants are required or were required to provide disclosure in certain reports regarding cybersecurity incidents. These incidents that are deemed as material. So with the advancement of technology, we know that there are bad actors out there who can use this technology to elicit ransomware. These type of items or these type of issues have prompted the SEC to finalize these rules, right? The amendments are required for timely disclosure of the material for cybersecurity incidents and annual disclosures. So annual disclosures related to cybersecurity risk management, strategy, and governance are required under the new Item 106 of Regulation SK. Go to the next slide. So beginning December 18, 2023, or in the reports dated December 18, 2023 or later, registrants were required to begin providing disclosure in Forms 8K and 6K. Forms 8K, so disclose cybersecurity incidents that are material in the Form 8K under Item 1.05. This disclosure is required within 4 business days, right, of the business actually determining that an incident is deemed material. Companies will have to use their better judgment on what they deem as material for this disclosure. Describe the material's attributes of its nature, scope, and timing, and impact or possible impact. Now, Forms 8K, we do know that we've seen some disclosure provided under Item 8.01. Disclosure under Items 8.01 is not necessarily deemed material. That information, once deemed material, would need to move under Item 1.05 in that Form 8K. Disclosure is also required by foreign private issuers under Form 6K. So foreign private issuers must also disclose any type of incident that they've also deemed material or is made public in a foreign jurisdiction to any stock exchange or securities holders. Okay. Form 6K does not include an item number such as the 8K with Item 1.05. So that disclosure will be required within the body of the document. Smaller reporting companies were allowed or granted an additional 180 days to be effective with the compliance date of actually providing this disclosure in Forms 8K and or 6K. So effective June 15, 2024. smaller reporting companies were required to start providing that disclosure. Okay. Our next slide. Okay. So all registrants are required or were required to begin compliance on an annual basis with their forms 10K and 20F. That disclosure is required or was required with any report or any annual report for fiscal year ending on or after December 15th, 2023. So annual disclosure in the 10K to be listed under item 1C, the heading of cybersecurity. Disclose whether procedures for cybersecurity risk management and or strategy were implemented and how the process was integrated into the overall risk management. Right? Describe management's role in assessing and managing material risks from cybersecurity threats, and describe management's and the board of directors' oversight of cybersecurity. So in Form 20F, item 16K, is where foreign private issuers will actually include this disclosure. Also describing the board of directors' oversight of any cybersecurity risk, and describe management's role in assessing and managing materials from cybersecurity risk. Now, providing this disclosure is mandated. The rule does not state that if disclosure is not provided, it will not remove your rights to being able to form a Form S3 or an SF3. It will not affect that, the ability to file those forms. But the SEC is constantly monitoring these disclosures. We do know that they are definitely implementing some type of penalties if disclosure is identified as existing but not being reported. So you truly want to make sure that you are reviewing any incidents that may seem to impact you as far as this disclosure is concerned, and being able to provide that in your current reports, your forms 8K, 6K, your 10K, and or your 20F. Okay. Our next slide. All right, so again, Form 20F, continuing, describing the Board of Directors' oversight of cybersecurity risk, and making sure that you're providing that information or describing the management's role in assessing and managing material risk from cybersecurity threats. Now, that was for the disclosure itself to be provided. Beginning 1 year after the initial compliance date, all registrants, and that includes smaller reporting companies, are required to start tagging this information in inline XBRL. So the inline XBRL tagging mandates block tagging for all narrative disclosure and detail tagging for any numeric values. Forms 10K and Forms 20F. Inline XBRL requirements begin for these reports for fiscal years ending on or after December 15th, 2024. For Forms 8K, Item 105, Form 6K, all registrants must begin tagging disclosure in inline XBRL, beginning with any reports filed on or after December 18th, 2024. Again, in that Form 8K, cybersecurity information that is included under Item 8.01 would not require tagging. If that information is deemed material, if you define or identify that information is deemed material, then you should move that information under Item 1.05 of the form and tag it in inline XBRL. Mm-hmm. Oh, for tagging requirements, I will turn it over to Nikki, and Nikki will provide detailed information on the taxonomy and the tagging requirements itself. Nikki?
Thank you very much, Angela, and hello,
You're
everyone.
welcome.
So now that we have an understanding of the rules, let's now explore some of the practical steps that are involved in XBRL tagging your cybersecurity disclosures. Okay, so let's start with the current reports. We're going to talk about the forms 8K and 6K. So here I have the CYD taxonomy for, again, the current reports, and this gives us a framework for the tagging. So for example, if there's a material cybersecurity incident, we need to tag key details like the incident's nature, scope, timing, and its impact. In addition to any incident information that is not available or undetermined at the time of filing. Also, I would like to call your attention to the detailed, actually, we'll talk about that in a moment. But next, I want to call your attention to the detail I have here on the right. It's important to note that all other reportable items in Form 8K, alongside all of the other reportable items in the Form 8K, the filing deadline for item 105 is your 4 business days after the triggering event. So important to note here, along with all the other reportable items for your Form 8K, you still have that 4 business day trigger. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in this slide, I want to just provide you an example of a Form 8K, and you're looking at the inline XBRL. So this is a scenario where a material cybersecurity incident has occurred. It's occurred on October 15th. Also here, I want to also highlight the 100,000 clients that's tagged on a detailed fact value that's tagged here in the opening paragraph. We'll discuss that in a moment. And then in this scenario, I've made the disclosures somewhat distinct and separate, which will allow me to present the XBRL tagging with less nuance, something also important to note. But this is not particularly common, not a particularly common structure. So I just want to call that out, that the way this is laid out is really to just give you the ease of XBRL tagging through this presentation. Next slide. So now here is the standard XBRL rendering of the tagged cybersecurity incident disclosures. And notice that all facts are tagged with the October 15th date. So when tagging the Form 8K or 6K, the period used should be the date of the report. So very important to note here. The period used when tagging the Form 8K or 6K should be the period of the date of the report. Also, if an amendment is filed to provide more information for a previously reported incident, you want to make sure you use the original date of the report, not the date of the amendment. So this consistency is very important because it'll keep track of the incident progress. Next slide. Here, I want to call your attention back to that detailed fact value, that 100,000 number of customers that was tagged. So as Angela mentioned, detailed fact values are required to be tagged. But just important to note here, while the rules don't require specifically detailed tagging, if you decide to include specific figures or detailed fact values like financial impacts or an approximate number of customers, like you see in this example, those fact values need to be detail tagged. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we're viewing the incident nature text block tagging. And here I'd like to highlight that when you have multiple incidents, in these situations is when you would also use what's called the material cybersecurity incident axes. And this axis allows you to separate or disaggregate the tagging of each incident. So the nature, scope, timing, impact, etc., would be disaggregated using a custom member element on this material cybersecurity incident axis. So to distinguish these separate incidents, it's very helpful to provide, an identifying mnemonic like you see in this example where I'm using the nature, first incident, and the date of the incident as the element and label. Also, just to note here, be sure to use the same member name on any subsequent amendments to the form. Okay, next slide. All right. One challenge that you might encounter with tagging these disclosures is that not all information is going to kind of fit neatly into a single text block. And you're going to hear me talk about this quite a bit because it could be a significant challenge to some. Sometimes the nature of an incident is part of a sentence and not necessarily a full paragraph. So when tagging, we might end up with fragments or partial sentences tagged as text blocks. So in these cases, the text block content could be a fragment within a sentence or fragments of a paragraph. Okay, next slide. Here we have the incident timing text block tag. And I just want to point out that this could be a common example of where you might find detailed tagging is needed. As I mentioned before, if you choose to disclose detailed fact values or figures, that those fact values need to be tagged. So if, for instance, your disclosure mentions how many days it specifically took to contain the incident, that time duration is a fact value that should be detailed tagged. Okay, next slide. All right, next up is the incident material impact or likely material impact text block tag. When reporting on an incident, the SEC does encourage us to focus on the material impact rather than technical details. So instead of describing, the intricate technical issues, we should really be detailing the impact on financial condition and operations, as well as providing any quantitative and qualitative factors based on your circumstances. So just want to point that out here at this text block. Next. And now we have the incident information, not available or undetermined text block. So the SEC's final rule, it really simplifies the amendment. So companies only need to file an amendment where the required information that was not determined or was unavailable at that time of the initial Form 8K filing. So you don't need to file an amendment for, again, those intricate technical issues. It's really just needing to file an amendment where the required information was not determined or was unavailable at the time of the initial Form 8K filing. Next slide. Now, let's briefly discuss the annual reports on Forms 10K and 20F. Here, the CYD taxonomy shifts focus to broader cybersecurity topics like risk management strategy and governance. And this involves also text block tagging, narrative descriptions for your board's oversight, the management's role, and any third-party involvement. But it's important to note also here that these XRL elements are are non-exclusive. So companies can additionally disclose any information necessary based, again, on their circumstances. Next slide. All right, here's an example of an inline XBRL tagged Form 10K. The Form 10K requires a narrative that discloses your risk management processes. And I want to kind of walk through a little bit how the tagging for this narrative would work. So within that narrative disclosure, you'll have for additional text block tag, and you'll have a Boolean flag. So let's first talk about the Boolean flag. So and this Boolean flag is required. So the Boolean flags have a true or false indicator, and we'll talk about that again a little bit in a subsequent slide. But here you'll see in this example, the flag represents your cybersecurity processes whether your cybersecurity processes are integrated into your overall risk management. So this is a section of text that you see tagged fully integrated, that inline tag. So that section of text represents a Boolean flag true. So meaning that that our cybersecurity processes are integrated, in this case, fully integrated. And so because this flag is true, then we would further need to tag the text block. So if the process is integrated, meaning that this flag is set to true, then a text block tag would capture the description of how the processes have been integrated. So just important to understand the relationship between the text block tags and the Boolean flags. Next slide. Okay, so I want to just talk a little bit more about the Boolean flags. So Boolean flags, like Boolean true, Boolean false, they allow us to mark sections of text as either true or false, right? So the inline XBRL transformation registry formats can be Boolean true and Boolean false, can be used to mark these sections of text and flag text as either true or false. So you don't need to tag the word true or the word false. You don't need to include those words in your actual disclosure. You're going to tag sections of text that are indicators or represent the true or false, okay? And you can see this in this example, the snippets of text like reports, cybersecurity matters, and audit and risk committee of our board of directors are both tagged with Boolean flags. Next slide. Okay, now here is the standard XBRL rendering. You can see the tagging of the concepts in the risk management, strategy, and governance disclosure. And also, these are generally narrative text blocks paired with Boolean flags, and both correspond to disclosure requirements, okay? So we use both text blocks and Boolean flags in tandem here in the Form 10K. And just to note here again, I want to just make sure I ring home the Boolean flag. So it really provides that quick answer, right? And the narrative tag or the text block tag gives you the how or the why. Next slide. So want to just note, close with my section with just wanting you to prepare, because tagging can get complex. It might seem like there's not a great detail to tag potentially, but tagging could be challenging and it might get complex, especially when one paragraph includes several items needing individual tags. Next slide. So to wrap up my section, it's important to reiterate that some information will span multiple sections of a disclosure. So if one paragraph touches on multiple disclosure points, like you see here, that I've highlighted in yellow, we need to apply tags strategically. So potentially you're going to need to split paragraphs to really meet those tagging requirements while not losing clarity. So please be sure to implement a very careful review of these tags to ensure accuracy and compliance. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Michelle.
Great, thanks very much, Nikki.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to go to some poll questions now. And for those of you getting CPE credit, please take note here. All right, so here's our first question. What is the effective date for the cybersecurity rule? Is it September 5th, 2023, September 5th, 2024, or December 18th, 2023, or December 18th, 2024? So we'll give you about another 30 seconds here to respond to that one, and then go on to poll question number 2. Okay, just another 10 seconds or so here. All right, we're going to close this one down and go to poll question number 2. All right, so which forms are used to provide cybersecurity incident disclosures? Is it forms 10K and 8K, forms 6K and 8K, or forms 20F, 10K, 6K, and 8K? So again, if you are getting CPE credit, make sure that you respond to this. Okay, and we are getting some questions in, which is great. I think we're going to hold our questions to the end, just because we have a lot of territory to cover here. So, but please post your questions. We will get to them. All right, just another 5 seconds. All right, we're going to be closing down this poll and going to the next section of our webinar today. We're going to have a discussion of the rule, and I'm just going to introduce Lisa Cuso. Lisa, again, is Expert Consulting Services and Professional Standards at Broadridge Financial Solutions. And Lisa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of moderating a discussion with 2 guest speakers that will share their perspective on the new cybersecurity disclosure. First, we have Nabil Chima. He is special counsel at the SEC. He works in the Office of Rulemaking within the Division of Corporation Finance. And we also have Justine Robinson. She is of counsel at Gibson Dunn, and she focuses on advising clients on securities regulation, corporate governance, and capital markets matters. So first, I'm going to ask Nabil, could you please tell us, why is the SEC focusing on cybersecurity disclosures, and what trends are you seeing that make this an important topic for investors and regulators?
Sure, Lisa. And as I begin, let me just start with a standard disclaimer we always use when we speak publicly. The views I state are my views as a member of the SEC staff. They're not necessarily the views of the commission, the commissioners, or other members of the staff. With that, to your question, Lisa, I would say that, just to step back for a moment, what the SEC is really focused on ensuring is that investors have the information that they need to make solid investment decisions. And as issues in companies evolve and develop, we want to keep up with those developments. Cybersecurity is something we've been concerned about for maybe over a decade now, as far as the information that investors have. Back in 2011, we issued staff guidance to companies saying, hey, cybersecurity is a more and more important issue. You already have existing risk disclosure obligations under which you may need to be talking about cybersecurity. And that got the ball rolling, and some companies did, start making some disclosures. But over time, the commission felt that the disclosures were kind of uneven and not as sufficient as they wanted. So in 2018, the commission itself, not just the staff, but the commission issued its own guidance, interpretive release, noting issues that companies should be talking about under existing rules. That continued on until 2022. By 2022, I think there were two trends. One is just that the commission didn't feel that the current disclosures were robust enough, but also, as everyone knows, cybersecurity became such an important issue. Over time, so much, maybe an overwhelming share of commerce really hinges on secure information systems. There are more and more threat actors who are going after, public companies, information systems, their data, et cetera. So there were kind of like a moment came for the commission where cybersecurity is extremely important to the function of a public company, and the commission felt that investors did not have the information that they needed to make solid investment decisions. So the commission proposed new rules in 2022, and then we adopted those rules in 2023, as Angela described. I should note there are other rules that are still out there as a proposal. Those are not for public companies. Those are for market participants like broker dealers. The commission is still considering those. But as far as public companies, we did adopt the rules in 2023, and we're seeing them. We're seeing companies comply with them and seeing how the disclosures develop.
Well, thank you. Justine, can you tell us how your clients, or what are your clients doing to prepare themselves for these new disclosure requirements in their 10K filings for this year?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So, as mentioned earlier on this webcast, there's the new cybersecurity disclosure rules in 10Ks that are requiring a disclosure about the company's cybersecurity risk management strategy, and also their governance. So what, the management's role is in assessing and managing these risks, and also the board's oversight. So we started seeing in 10Ks that were filed this spring, companies complying with this new disclosure rule. And when we started working with our clients on this disclosure, it was a really thoughtful process in tailoring the disclosure in light of the company size, the nature, the scope of their business. Sometimes the complexity of the business requires sort of a more, there's more risk to cybersecurity incidents, or they have more personal customer employee data that's, they need to make sure that they safe keep. There's a tension between the disclosure not being too generic. So as Nabil mentioned, making sure that you provide the comprehensive disclosure that enables investors to make an informed decision about the company, but also not disclosing sensitive information that may be exploited by threat actors. So really companies had to sit down, they had to take a look at the top-down approach of how they assess, how they identify, how they manage risks from cybersecurity threats, and then how they'll disclose that in their 10K. And we worked with a number of clients, not only on crafting this new disclosure, but also on assessing or assisting in setting up incident response plans. So, some of the larger companies, they may already have a cybersecurity team, or they may already have incidents response plans in place. But we helped smaller companies build those plans, but also for companies that did have these systems in place, we really had to take it from just sort of a technical response. How do we address if we have an incident that occurs? How do we address it? How do we resolve it? To also, how do we assess the impact of the response? How do we assess the materiality? How do we disclose this in the future? And how do we kind of put in place procedures to monitor incidents, post incident, so we can disclose that in our public filings. So we're seeing more companies provide training to their board, to their committees. We're seeing whole teams developed around cybersecurity threats and assessments. When we look at the actual disclosure in the 10K, from some of the top 100 companies and the S&P 500, really the disclosure right now is kind of around how they integrate cybersecurity into their enterprise risk management, whether they retain any third parties to kind of help them assess or process any cybersecurity incidents, what tools they have in place, what internal reporting processes they have in place for cybersecurity incidents, and then also sort of how they delegate to, how the board delegates the oversight. So whether it's the board, whether it's, for example, the audit committee or some other risk committee that kind of has the oversight, and then also what management rules are in place, whether there's a chief information security officer or chief technology officer or a whole team that is now in charge of kind of assessing these risks. So I think it's really just sort of taking a closer look at what they have been doing and what they need to do in order to have a very robust process in place to address any threats in the future.
Well, they've been quite busy then this last year, getting prepared for tagging this coming year. So both Nabil and Justine, so what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges for issuers complying with this rule? I don't know who wants to go first, but
I'll jump in. I think what we've been hearing from companies and what we've been seeing really centers on that materiality determination. As Angela described, the incident disclosure rule really hinges on determining materiality. The company discovers an incident, it starts to gather information. It doesn't actually file the 8K until it determines that the incident was material. We're finding some companies are having difficulty making that materiality determination, and we've seen more than a few filings that companies have gone ahead and filed the 8K without determining materiality, so much so that our director, the division director here at the SEC, issued a statement back in May just emphasizing that, hey, the 8K filing under these new rules really is limited to material cybersecurity incidents. You're totally fine disclosing non-material incidents under other 8K items, 8.01, as I think Angela mentioned. But this requirement really is focused on material incidents, and we're hoping that over time companies are able to develop processes to make that materiality determination. But I think that's really the initial challenge for now.
Justine?
Yeah, I would echo that as well, sort of as a main challenge, and I think also kind of leading into sort of how this is not just sort of a one-time disclosure obligation that they now add to their 10K or 20F. It touches a bunch of different departments in the company now. So you have your IT system talking to your legal, talking to your IR, talking to financial reporting, and making sure that you're all on the same page, making sure that you can respond to the incident, assess the materiality, make a determination whether it needs to be disclosed or how it needs to be disclosed. So really it's sort of working those departments together and syncing them up that is something that companies need to make sure that they're assessing going forward.
So it doesn't sound like there's a specific formula that all companies can follow. It sounds like it's much more unique to the company. But if these companies aren't sure if an incident's material, how should they handle it afterwards? If they're not sure when they file that it's material, what should they do?
I mean, I would have a couple of suggestions. One is if you're not sure it's material, you're not required under the rules to file anything. Now, I understand why a company might want to get out ahead of it for other reasons to get it out there. I would encourage companies to explore other avenues to put their information out there. We're not the only, SEC is not the only way to get the information out there. And if you do want to file an 8K, we do have item 8.01, which is kind of our catch-all other events item. And a company could certainly file it there.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think companies, it's not just, is this material to our business or financial condition or results of operation? I think they also have to look sort of at more qualitative and quantitative factors as well about, how does this harm our reputation or, our customers, our relationship with our customers, and, what is the amount of data that's impacted or how much this impacts our day-to-day operations. Maybe it's just a small incident that occurs, but it doesn't overall impact the day-to-day operations. So I think, it's definitely a overall mix of factors in determining materiality and whether that 105 is triggered or whether, for making sure you get the information out there, whether it's a press release or an 801 8K, that you know, at the time of assessment is, you know, the way to go.
Well, along those same lines, so Nabil, if a filer doesn't have all the information they feel needs to be reported at the time of the incident, do they need to file it later when it is available as an update?
They do. Yeah, this is actually in the rule. And let me distinguish two scenarios. So one is the filer, as you mentioned, does not have, there's a required piece of information in the rule, and the filer does not have it. Now, the rule is pretty straightforward. It says you disclose the nature, scope, and timing of the incident, and you disclose the material impact or the likely material impact. So, for example, say that the filer knows it experienced the incident, it knows the scope, it knows that this is a material incident, but doesn't quite know the timing of the incident. They would be required, because they have determined that the incident is material, they have to go ahead and file within 4 business days. What they would do is they would go ahead and file and say, here's the nature of the incident, the scope, the impact. We don't know the timing. We're working on it. And then when that information becomes available, the filer would go back and just file an amended 8K. Now, what I want to do is distinguish that from another scenario where the filer does have all of the required elements to begin with, and they make that filing. If they've satisfied all the elements of the rule, they do not have a kind of general duty to update. They're obviously going to develop more information as time goes on. This is not a continuous update where you have to keep filing additional 8Ks. If you've satisfied the obligation in your first filing, then you're good.
Yeah, I think we will see, if an incident does occur at a company, that will over time kind of impact how they assess their risk disclosure in their 10K. If they say, oh, we've never had any material cybersecurity incident, and then they have one, of course, that changes, and you want to craft how you've addressed any incidents, just sort of making sure that you're very holistic in terms of your 10K disclosure going forward. So, as Nabil said, you may not have to specifically address any of the item 105 requirements anymore, but we will probably see, that get picked up overall or generally in the 10K disclosure as well.
So along those same lines, so if a company gathers information after filing an incident report, and then they decide it's not material, do they have to file again, indicating that it's not material? I know materiality, we've talked a lot about it, but what happens if they decide it's not material?
I'll attempt to answer, Justine. I'll let you do it. I feel like this is the hardest question in the bunch. So as I said, a few minutes ago, the item 1.058K really is for material incidents. If your incident is not material, I guess it depends what you said in the original filing. In the original filing, if you said, this incident, if you went and filed under 1.05 and said it's a material incident, maybe, and here I'm speaking as, one member of the staff, maybe the best avenue is an amended 8K, just so that investors, if they see the original 8K, they'll see the amended one and they'll see that it's not material. But I would say that it's not a requirement. Like, you can explore other options for getting that information out there. It's really, the rule does not really cover this issue. But I'd be very interested to hear what Justine has to say.
Yeah, I think what we'd see here is, or if a company complies with the technical requirements of 105, so all the information is out there, we don't have any requirement to amend the 105 and sort of update the disclosure, I think that we can technically stop there, right? But if we're saying in the 105.8K, like, oh, there's no material impact, but all of a sudden, you do reassess it and there is some financial impact to revenues in the quarter because, you weren't able to, close some contracts with customers because of the incident, that would kind of shift that materiality determinations, from, not really a material impact to material. Because I think, there are some companies that still sometimes file under 105 when they haven't made that materiality determination yet. But I think it'll be interesting to see if companies have said that they have had a material impact and then later on assess, oh no, it actually wasn't a material impact. They might do an 8KA just to sort of say, we've resolved the incident, here's the kind of end all be all. This isn't required under 105, of course, to say, here's how we resolved it. But I think we see some companies do like to kind of close the loop on that, especially if they've first thought it was a bigger concern than it was, and then they realized actually no, it wasn't as bad as we thought it was. But I think what we'll probably see more of is companies going with the 801 approach before they know whether it's material, and then saying, hey, look, here, this happened. We don't know if it's material. If it is, then we will make the necessary 105 disclosures, but stop at, 801, whether or not it's material. So that way they don't have to jump to 105 until they know whether they've had a material impact.
All right. Well, do either of you know, can you speak to like how many cybersecurity incidents have been filed to date, and what kind of incidents are they?
Yeah, we took a little look at what has been filed on 8K so far, 105 8K. And so there's been 23 companies that have disclosed cybersecurity incidents under 105. And for the most part, they generally follow a similar disclosure pattern where they say, the company's detected unauthorized access to certain of their systems. Sometimes they'll be able to disclose, if it's some cyber threat actor that's relatively well known, but usually it's an unknown threat actor. And they'll talk about, the two key things that happen are whether there's disruption in the systems, whether there's, operation shutdown because of it, or if there's exfiltration of customer or employee or personal data. Those are kind of the two big things that we're seeing. And they don't always go into specifics. It's usually a very generic, this incident happened and this has kind of disrupted our systems, and either personal data was pulled or, systems operations were disrupted. And then they'll usually say, they took measures to shut down the system or isolate the impacted systems. And then whether, sometimes they'll say, our normal operations are still ongoing. Maybe it was just like one small system that was impacted. So the disclosure itself it doesn't get in too much into the weeds about what particularly happened. I think there's a sensitivity to make sure that they don't inadvertently disclose any weakness in their system to other threat actors, of course. And then of those 23 companies, some of I think 17 of them were filed before May 2024, which is kind of when the SEC, the director of the Division of Corporation Finance, issued a statement about kind of using 105 versus 801. And before that kind of May 2024 timeline, a lot of the 8Ks would say, the company's assessing materiality or hasn't made a determination. And so sometimes they would file amendments giving more information about materiality or whether they've assessed it at that time. Post May 2024, there's only been 6 105 8Ks filed. And interestingly, 3 of them, 3 companies actually filed an 801 8K beforehand saying that they had this material incident, cybersecurity incident, and they're assessing materiality. And then they subsequently filed a 105 when they made that materiality assessment. So I think we're going to see more of that. There's been about 15 companies post May 2024 that have filed 801 8Ks disclosing cybersecurity incidents. So I think that's kind of the path forward at this time.
Okay, well, Nabil, we've talked a lot about the disclosure and the requirements, but I guess, in closing, just some questions about the XBRL component of this disclosure, and what do you think, or how do the requirements that the data be structured in an XBRL format enhance the usefulness of the rule and the reported data, and how do you think this data is going to be used, and who will be using it?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I think this really goes back to our mission of making sure investors have the information they need to make smart investment decisions. It'd be one thing for us to put out this rule and these disclosures to be made on 8Ks. And if investors had to manually go and read each 8K, then that's not a very efficient process. And so the commission added this XBRL requirement, making the disclosures machine readable, more easily, makes it more easy for investors, investment analysts, investment companies, market participants, particularly professional ones, to go in, pull the data, and more easily compare it across industries and across companies. So we think that just enhances the usefulness of the data and its usefulness for making investment decisions. Our primary focus is investors. That said, anyone can access XBRL, and so we're aware that there are other stakeholders out there that are also using the data, which we think is great. I think I'm generally aware. I've heard of different research. Different researchers out there who are looking at, for example, how do company stock prices react when they disclose an incident? I'm sure there are others out there. So I think that's great that there are other stakeholders that are using the data, but our goal is really to make sure investors have what they need.
All right, well, we're getting close here on time. So I'd like to thank you both for sharing your thoughts and perspectives on this new cybersecurity disclosure. It was extremely informative, and your insights, I think, will be very helpful for all of our listeners today. So next we have Scott Tice, who will be sharing some tips and resources on cybersecurity disclosures.
Thank you. That was really great. Some good information in that. I'm going to kind of get down into the nuts and bolts of this and give you some of the information that I think you'll need to actually use this on a practical basis as opposed to the legal aspects. Being someone who runs a small company and has had to go through SOC compliance and security and things like that, a lot of this rings a familiar bell when it comes to having to deal with cybersecurity and penetration testing and the kind of issues that can come up. Not that we've had any issues, but there's constantly being on the watch for these types of things. I'm going to start, first of all, next slide, please. So we've had a couple of questions in the Q&A area that actually cover some of the things that are in this. And looking at the kinds of tags that you have, you're going to have text block tags, and this is largely text blocks for the tagging in this taxonomy. And then you have these Boolean concepts for risk management. The Boolean really only applies to 105, and it corresponds with a true or false affirmation. And if you have a true affirmation, then you need to have the text block that goes along with it. So the Boolean items are then paired with a text block, whether it has a policy or characteristic, and then the text is how. So going on here to the next slide, I'm going to show you a little bit of stuff that's going to be on a handout that you'll be able to get. And I think that David is going to put this in the chat for us, the link to it. It'll be available on XBRL US's site. So we have a guide that then outlines all the items. This is taken from the rule as well as from the preparer's guide. And then there are two primary tables in here for the periodic disclosure and risk management, and then incident. So you'll see then here we've got the different types of tags, what the reference is, and then what type of data it is, and then some narrative about it. And then the emphasis is added into there to help break some of these things down for you. Next slide, please. So within this guide then, we've taken some examples of information that's been filed and sanitized it a bit, and then looked at the areas that are being tagged. So you'll see here the blue area, we've got the entire cyber risk management and strategy. So that entire text block that encompasses the remainder of the facts. And in this case, we've got the flag that's marked there in green. So you'll have nested tags, meaning that you'll start off with a larger block, and then inside of that have smaller blocks that are identified. And you may have more than one when you get into doing incident reporting, if you've got more than one incident to actually report that you'll be putting together. Next slide, please. So one of the things I would recommend doing is you've already been having to comply with this rule. The rule's been out before the XBRL requirement has been out, and go and take the existing strategy risk management stuff and go tag it and see what you end up with. And actually, a thought occurred to me in the previous slide that I forgot to mention, and that was when you structure your text, try to avoid continuations. So you don't want to have to start and stop particular facts because you've got a lot of information that may not be relevant to the XBRL. It might be material, but you can reorganize that to make it easier to tag. And your preparer might be able to help you with that as well. So grab last year's 10K or 20F and try this and see what you have. Are the required items present? Are you actually disclosing things? This is one of the things that we found with XBRL versus text. Sometimes the data model is created based on the rule, and people will find that they're not actually disclosing all the elements in the rule. So it's a good review as well. So use the preparer's guide, and I'll have a link to that in a moment. And other third-party data, that's one of the things we're also going to provide to help you with that. And again, watch for those nested or overlapped items. Nesting's okay. Overlapping becomes a problem where you have to have continuations. Next slide, please. So I would develop a checklist. Now, your organization is probably going to have a CISO that deals with all of this stuff in the frightening world of Wild West cybersecurity. But when you do have an incident that could potentially happen, this should be part of it. And you have that 4 business day requirement, and know what you're going to have to say, what material things you're going to have to say, and then know how you're going to have to tag it and what you need to review. So you're not in a big hurry trying to deal with this thing. And there's a lot of other things that may be going on depending on how serious it is that you're going to have to deal with. So go and do that ahead of time. And as always, I always recommend that you test file things before the actual deadline. In fact, when you do your mock-up stuff, go ahead and test file it. See if it test files correctly. See if you get any errors or warnings. So you're ready and have a level of confidence with that. Next slide, please. So again, be ready. This should be part of your entire procedures and policies. And again, I would probably have a template set up or work with your preparer to have some sort of a template to work with that and incorporate it into your plan. So next slide, please. So now we'll come into where some of the resources are. There's been some questions on this. So we have the actual SEC rule, which is the link here. And if you want to take a screenshot of this, and I think the slides will be available too, you'll be able to have this link. And then there's the preparer's guide itself. It's a little technical. There's a couple things in there. I noticed that there's some JSON stuff in there. You can just ignore that. Just go for what they're actually saying to disclose. There's principally 2 entry points for each of the different types of disclosures that you need to have. And then what we'll show you here that I've been using as an example is a CYD fact sheet. And that's in the chat. There's a link to that from XBRL US. So you'll see here, I just kind of jumped into the middle on page 3. We have part of that table. And if you scroll down for the SK 106 items, it'll cover all the different elements and concepts. So you can go through that. And that is then followed by, if you scroll down a little farther, an example of how we would see that as being tagged. Now, this is just our interpretation of it. So make sure you look at the rule and do what you feel and work with counsel in terms of how things should be disclosed and what should be disclosed. And scroll down a little more, please. So next page, let's go a little farther because I want to get to the item 105. So there's another table here then that marks those particular elements. And there is a little bit of there's overlap, but there's also differences. So we'll cover that. And then the next, let's go down to page 8, please. Okay, so right here, then you'll see where previously Nikki Ann talked about the material cyber incident axis. So every one of your incidences that you would report under the 8K then would be under this particular axis as part of that domain. So presumably, hopefully you only have one thing to report, but either way, you're going to create a member that belongs to that axis. You're going to give it some sort of identification, and that'll be used then going forward. So again, this information is in that in the chat, and if you go back to that screen on the slides, you can grab those links as well, and the links are in that fact sheet too. There was a question, I'm going to go ahead and just quick grab it here that was off of the chat. If a Boolean flag is tagged as false, is the expectation that the related text block will not be tagged in the filing? Is that something that maybe the SEC could answer? Or anybody could answer that? Nobody wants to jump on it. I'd have to go look at it in more detail. I would imagine no. My understanding is that they're paired together. I think it's kind of a true, you put it in there if it's true. If you're not disclosing it, then there is nothing to tag. And by the way, when we say Boolean in the IXBRL, we're saying there is a text transform that'll say it's always true. So you'd have some level of text, you tag that and then with a concept, and then there's a transform that just says true. That's always true. Okay, and the other question that was outstanding is where can you find the materials, and that's right here. So with that, thank you very much, and I think this has been great. And any other questions you want to cover, Michelle?
I think that's all the questions that we have right now. We have had a couple of questions about having access to the slides and to the replay, and absolutely, we'll be posting all of those in the next couple of days. And so I want to thank everybody and go straight into our poll questions. We have 2 final poll questions. So let me go ahead and launch that because we're running up against the time here. So this question is, what is the filing deadline for Form 8K Item 105? Is it 3 days after the trigger, 4 days after the trigger, or immediately? So we'll take a few minutes, a few seconds actually, for this question to go through. All right, about another 20 seconds here before we go into our final poll question. All right, we're going to close this one down and go to the final poll. And the question is, what period should be used for amendments to a previously reported incident? Should it be the date of the amendment, the original date of the report, or is it that amendments are not required to be filed? Okay, just about another 20 seconds here. All right, we're going to close down our last poll. And again, I want to thank all of our terrific speakers from Angela and Scott and Nikki and Lisa and Nabil and Justine. You did a great job with sharing your insights. And also thanks everybody for joining us here today. And I want to mention another event that we have coming up, which is coming up next week. And this is our one-day conference, Digital Reporting for Measurable Results, on Thursday, November 14th in Washington, D.C. We're very excited to have with us a keynote speaker, U.S. Congressman Patrick McHenry, who is chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman McHenry was also one of the co-sponsors of the Financial Data Transparency Act. And we're also going to have special videotape remarks from U.S. Senator Mark Warner, who was also one of the co-sponsors. So we have both sides of the aisle here. And we have other speakers coming in from the International Sustainability Standards Board, from the London Stock Exchange Group, FactSet, Data Foundation, the Global LEI Foundation, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, BNY, formerly BNY Mellon, and KPMG, and more. So please join us next week, and we'll be continuing the discussion on digital data standards and how they can help support business, government, and and all kinds of entities reporting. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week, if not on the next webinar. Thank you.